especially on the grow site. So what we thought we'd do is have a session that talks about the intersection between cannabis, its industry, its manufacturing, energy, and economic development. I'm really excited to bring this first of its kind session, Missouri-based, to you. We have Molly Graham from the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, Derek Smith from Resources Innovation Institute, and Lauren Gakowski from Energy Advisor at Franklin Energy. Sorry, Lauren, if I messed up your name there. First up is going to be Molly from MIA. Molly, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Josh. Can you hear me?
I hear you and I see you. You are good to go.
Great. Well, I will take it away. Thank you, Josh. As Josh mentioned, my name is Molly Graham. I am the Programs Director at the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, or MIA. You can go on to the next slide. If you're not familiar with MIA, we are a membership-based organization that operates in 13 states here in the Midwest with our office headquartered in Chicago. We have about 160 members right now, and they kind of span everyone who works on energy efficiency or touches energy efficiency here in the Midwest. We've got utilities, research institutions, program implementation companies, really anyone who's involved in energy efficiency is likely somehow involved with MIA. And we really see our role in the Midwest as an advocate and an educator for energy efficiency policies, and also as a vehicle for helping to implement cost-effective solutions. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd start off today just by covering a little bit of what the cannabis market looks like here in the Midwest and MIA's footprint. So I will note that this map has not been updated since the election that happened here a few weeks ago, but we've got 2 states here in the Midwest that have passed recreational cannabis use, with South Dakota just being the most recent one that passed recreational and medicinal cannabis use as a ballot measure in November. I believe they were the first state in the nation to legalize medicinal and recreational use at the exact same time. So they made a little bit of history a few weeks ago. And if you're not familiar with the cannabis industry, when we say recreational use, that means any adult can use cannabis or consume cannabis, much like we regulate alcohol. Medicinal just means patients with qualifying medical conditions can receive a medical card to purchase cannabis. As Josh alluded to, because cannabis is illegal at the federal level, the cannabis if it's legal to consume in a state, that means it also has to be grown in that state, since you can't cross state lines with a federally illegal substance. So that's why I'm talking a little bit about where it's legal to consume in the Midwest, because that also means where growing cannabis is actually happening. Next slide, please. So here in Missouri, just a quick timeline on how medical cannabis was approved. In 2014, cannabis was decriminalized, and then in 2018, it was actually included as a ballot measure that passed. And so Amendment 2 was, as it's been referred to, legalized medicinal use in the state of Missouri. And then in 2020 is when sales of that medical product actually began. There's usually a little bit of a lag time between legislation passing, actual cannabis products hitting the market. So the first sales of medicinal cannabis actually began just 2 months ago in Missouri. Next slide, please. After Amendment 2 was passed at the state level, the state commissioned a market impact study or market demand study to be conducted. The University of Missouri actually conducted this on behalf of the state to understand what some of the anticipated impacts and demand for legal cannabis could be. And so the study estimated that by 2022, the state would have approximately 26,000 approved patients or consumers of medical cannabis, assuming that it would kind of take a slow, steady, increased approach as soon as applications were open for approval. They also estimated that about 5,000 to 15,000 pounds of cannabis flower would be needed to meet the demand of consumers. I will note, though, that we've seen in other states who have done similar market demand studies before legislation has gone into place, that they're likely underestimated. We've seen Colorado and Illinois did market demand studies that were significantly underestimated at the outset of their legal market. And so we could see the actual production of cannabis in Missouri exceeding some of these levels. Next slide, please. So before we get into the kind of the energy impacts of this new market, I think it's important to understand both the size and the scale of what this is going to look like here in Missouri. So the oversight agency of the cannabis industry is the State Health and Senior Services Department. They have decided to cap the number of cultivation facilities that they will give licenses to at 60. So right now there are 10 approved cultivation facilities that may be operational or just about to be operational in Missouri, and there's 50 applications that are still in process. Those 50 applications have been kind of pre-approved, and they're just going through the like the rubber stamping process of getting them their license. So there will be 60 cultivation facilities across the state of Missouri. There will also be no more than 192 dispensaries. Those are the stores that sell the cannabis product. Similar to cultivators, 17 have been approved. They're likely operational or just about to be operational, and they have 175 still in process, but those have been pre-approved as well. I will note, though, that there have been several efforts to repeal the license caps that have been put in place. I know that there's a couple lawsuits. There was also a bill on the floor at the state legislature to repeal the caps that have been put in place. There have been some concerns that those that were awarded that pre-approval may have gotten some sort of special consideration through, you know, having connections with the oversight agency. So there's some corruption concerns. So we may see those caps lifted or changed. But that's where they stand right now. And as I mentioned before, in the initial demand study that was conducted, they anticipated about 26,000 patients consuming cannabis by 2022. Well, at the end of 2020, we have seen just under 23,000 patients get approval. So I think by the end of 2022, we'll likely be above the market demand's original estimate. And then I will note, just because it's important from an energy perspective, the legislation does allow patients to grow up to 6 plants at home. Patients must be granted a patient cultivation license, which will be different than just the card that they carry to purchase cannabis. So it should be easy to track at the state level how many patients are growing their own cannabis at home. I don't anticipate it to be a large amount. If you think about, for example, beer, you can brew your own beer at home, but many people don't because it's more convenient to go to the store and buy it. But there may be some people who choose to grow plants at home, and then from an energy perspective, we'll want to make sure that we are targeting those people with incentives to purchase energy efficient equipment to grow those plants. Next slide, please. So the state allows 3 different types of cannabis cultivation. You can grow indoors, which would be more of kind of a warehouse, fully enclosed type facility. And they've put a cap on the size of that facility at up to 30,000 square feet of flowering canopy. If you're not familiar with cannabis, the flower is kind of the last stage in the growing cycle. This is right before you harvest and process the product. And so it's not total canopy of plants, it's just plants in the flowering stage is capped at 30,000 square feet. Outdoor growing is also allowed, but you can only have up to 2,800 plants, individual plants. So it's not regulated based on the square footage, also in the flowering stage. And then there's the greenhouses, which, as you can imagine, is an indoor facility, but not as tight of an envelope as an actual indoor facility. You can have up to 2,800 flowering plants or 30,000 square feet of flowering canopy. I think they allow the grower to make that distinction of which one they would like to comply with. I'm only highlighting this because each type of growing will result in different energy impacts and energy needs. So it's important to understand what's on the table. Next slide, please. And then I thought I would just highlight a few other states in the Midwest for the sake of comparison to understand the scale of Missouri's program. So as I mentioned, Illinois and Michigan both have recreational programs. They are the largest medical producer or cannabis producers in the Midwest. So I highlighted Illinois and Missouri and Michigan here. Illinois is phasing out the licenses that they're awarding for cultivators. However, they have put a cap at 30 large cultivation facilities, and they define that as up to 210,000 square feet of plants in the flowering stage, which is significantly larger than Missouri's cap. And then 150 what are called craft grow facilities, so the smaller scale grow facilities. They can have up to 5,000 square feet of canopy, which they can apply for increases up to 14,000. So I'm only mentioning Illinois because it's important just to understand the scale of these facilities in Illinois versus Missouri. And overall, there will be less facilities in Missouri than there will be in Illinois. Next slide, please. I will mention that there are some energy requirements that were written into the legislation in Illinois that are very important to understand and have been getting a lot of attention lately because they're new, and Illinois is kind of the first state to write energy requirements within the legislation itself. So the legislation stipulates that cultivation facilities must meet a lighting power density of at least or no more than 36 watts per square foot, and heating and cooling must be achieved through either a high efficiency ductless split HVAC unit, variable refrigerant flow HVAC unit, or more energy efficient equipment. That has been drawing a lot of concerns and questions from cultivators on how they're going to meet those requirements. The intention of the energy piece of the legislation was to set kind of an efficiency baseline. However, this has been a little bit problematic and will likely be challenging to enforce. If anyone's familiar with ductless mini splits or VRF systems, they don't handle latent load very well, and cannabis cultivation facilities need to dehumidify a lot. They have very high dehumidification needs, and so neither one of those pieces of equipment will work very well in an indoor grow facility or an agricultural setting. So this is a little bit problematic. And then on the next slide, I'll highlight Michigan real quick. So Michigan legalized recreational cannabis in 2019. So they've been doing this for just about a year. Right now they have already over 400 cultivation licenses that have been awarded, which is a huge amount. They cap theirs, they have different classes that people can file for licenses under, and it's based on the total number of plants. So Michigan has a very large market in comparison to Illinois and Missouri. And finally, on the next slide, what are some of the energy impacts or energy considerations for this industry? The short answer is it's kind of hard to say. We don't have a ton of data on how these facilities use energy, especially data that's specific to the Midwest, which has a much different climate than some of the other states who have big cannabis markets like Oregon, California, Colorado, Massachusetts. But this isn't improving. There's ongoing reporting and benchmarking that these facilities are now taking part of to report their energy use, so we can kind of grow our data set and understand how energy is used at these facilities. But these facilities ultimately are going to impact load growth for utilities. Probably unanticipated load growth, since this is a brand new industry that I don't think anyone was expecting, which can negatively impact energy efficiency targets or climate goals. The city of Denver has reported that they've been seeing about 4% of their total electricity load dedicated to cannabis, and Oregon historically has seen some localized brownouts that they were able to tie directly to cannabis cultivation. So it's important to understand that these facilities could have a large impact on the electric grid. And then on my last slide, I just wanted to draw a few comparisons to how a few states are regulating the energy use or encouraging clean energy and energy conservation initiatives at the state level. So I highlighted Massachusetts. They have energy efficiency and conservation plans required in the application process to receive a cultivation license. They also have energy and water consumption reporting on an ongoing basis, so we can kind of monitor how these facilities are using energy. They also have prescriptive requirements on a lighting power density, similar to what I outlined in Illinois. Illinois, on the other hand, has an environmental plan included in the license application, but it's very vague in what that environmental plan needs to include. There's no template, and it's only worth a very small amount of points on the overall application scoring process, so it's not weighted very heavily. And then there's those prescriptive requirements in the legislation that I mentioned that are problematic. And because all of this was included in the legislation language, new legislation would need to pass in order to make any changes or amendments, which is challenging. And then finally, California, they have an ongoing stakeholder process to write their Title 24 requirements for indoor agriculture. This wouldn't be specific to cannabis. Title 24 is their state building energy codes. This has been a long process to gather input from various stakeholders and ensure that what is written can be implemented, and they would go into effect in January 2023. It's just a couple different options on the table on how people are considering incentivizing and requiring these facilities to consider clean energy or energy efficiency initiatives. So with that, I think the next slide is just my contact information. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I will pass it on to Derek to talk more about the actual energy usage from these facilities.
Fantastic. Thank you, Molly.
All right, can everybody hear and see me? Okay.
Here we go. Yep, you're good, Derek.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Josh. Great presentation, Molly, as always. Welcome, everybody. It's really nice to be with you. I was actually born in St. Louis, in St. John's and Creve Coeur, so it's a real pleasure to be in touch with my home state. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and I'm executive director of Resource Innovation Institute, which is a nonprofit that's addressing the energy issues in this sector and beyond. Go ahead. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about us, just for context, and then I'm also going to spend a little bit of time sharing some tools and resources that we have for both utilities and governments to help them deal with these subjects. It's not to give a commercial on who we are and what we're doing. It's more to just let you know that there are a lot of free, good resources that can help you learn a lot and react to the market and plan for it. And there's very, very little information like that is peer reviewed and has the fingerprints on it from other governments and utilities who've been experiencing this market in their jurisdictions. Go ahead. So briefly, we are objective, we're data driven. We've been around for 5 years. We've got a lot of expertise in a lot of areas, including policy. We were founded by a energy advisor for 2 Oregon governors, and folks who worked on the LEED Green Building program on the board of the U.S. Green Building Council, as well as developing utility programs all over North America. So we've got a lot of expertise, and we're directing it toward this specific industry and even broader with controlled environment ag. Go ahead. So what we do is we essentially measure resource efficiency. The US DOE is not involved like it typically would be in this sector because of the federal illegality. So we're essentially filling that vacuum, and we've established the KPIs that measure energy and water efficiency. So we're helping governments and utilities understand benchmarks and work their way toward baselines. We're informing a bunch of different market actors on best practices, as I'll share with you in a minute. We are heavily involved in all the states that Molly just outlined that are dealing with policy and regulatory approaches. And ultimately, we're connecting the dots between a lot of standard setting organizations. And we're, at the end of the day, we're out after verification of what is most efficient, what's driving efficient production. And quite frankly, like Molly said, we just don't know enough yet. We have some good information and we've got a lot more coming. So pretty excited about that. So in terms of resources that might be of use to you, go ahead, Josh. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And just these are all the folks that we work with in all these different sectors. We just recently got an award notice from the USDA, so we will be taking everything we're learning in cannabis cultivation and applying it to the broader controlled environment ag market. So any crop grown anywhere in any greenhouse or warehouse, it will be addressing the resource efficiency associated with that. Go ahead. So the heartbeat of everybody that we interact with is our technical advisory council, and both Molly and Lauren are part of that. Thank you both for your expertise and contributions. We would welcome you all to consider joining this effort and learning in a network way on a lot of these subjects: HVAC, lighting, utility best practices, water policy, data, controls, and automation. A lot of subject matter that is relevant. Go ahead. One specific part of our technical advisory council that I want to mention, and that again both Molly and Lauren are involved in, is our utility working group. We invite anyone in the audience who wants to join as a utility or an implementation firm. That's the whole point. There's a lot to learn and a lot that people can learn from each other. So we just create the venues for that type of thing to happen. Go ahead. All right, so specifically in terms of tools and resources that might be useful to you, we have a resource benchmarking platform called the Cannabis Power Score. For cultivators, it provides facility performance benchmarking. For a utility, it would basically help you assess how your customer base is doing relative to other cultivators in other markets and within your market. It could help you assess benchmarks and baselines. And ultimately, we're serving Massachusetts on a compliance standpoint, and it might be relevant in Illinois soon, who has a reporting requirement. So essentially, cultivators in Massachusetts are fulfilling their state requirement to report their energy and water usage through the Power Score. And in those interactions where they're trying to just comply with the laws, we actually have the opportunity to have a moment with them to talk about benchmarking and the value of understanding and their energy footprint and how to be more efficient. So this tool is free for cultivators. It's free on the compliance side. There are some expenses associated with like a utility adopting it for program design, but it's all very accessible and we're happy to serve. That's why it was created. Go ahead. We also produce a lot of publications. Most of these are free. We have the best practices guides that are tailored toward cultivators. Any of you can put these on your, you have to download them from our website, but you're welcome to push these out to your audiences. In Massachusetts, we did a state-specific best practices guide to help them deal with the specific energy regulations in that state. We could do that for Illinois as an example. But the HVAC and lighting ones are just amazing resources. 20 pages of dense recommendations on how to measure and work your way toward efficiency through usage of efficient technology and just sizing HVAC correctly, et cetera, et cetera. We have a utility primer that we will be pushing out to utilities, making available, that is really like detailed information on how to set up a program, how to interact with the laws that are, arriving in your state, and have, how to interact from a program standpoint with those laws, as well as a full overview of how various regulated markets are dealing with incentive programs and whatnot. So very valuable resource there. And if you just want detailed information about, how much energy is being used in these facilities, I would definitely direct you to the Cannabis Energy Report. And then if you want to become a member, we have detailed information beyond that. Go ahead. And the final thing I'll tell you about as a service that's available is, we're basically training the whole marketplace on how to be more efficient. It's not easy. And frankly, there's no blueprint for it. And every operation, as you will see, every cultivator is different. But there are basic learning elements that everybody should know. And so we have training programs directed at various audiences you see on the left, and examples of who we've been working with on the right. Okay. So next thing I wanted to offer, go ahead, Josh, is I believe this is going to be, a research and recommendation. So I'm going to, as Molly said, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we're finding through our research about how much energy is being used. I'll give you a few different scenarios of different markets and what they're, how they're impacted. And then I'll offer you a few recommendations on how to deal with this unique customer class. Go ahead. So in the West, we did some research with a firm called ERS, and this has been published in Cannabis Business Times. But essentially, what I'm showing you here is on your as you're reading the screen on your left, Figure 1 is greenhouses, and so you'll see a large amount of natural gas used there. This is from Boulder County in Colorado. On the right, you're looking at an indoor scenario, and with a lot less natural gas, and the lighting load is affecting is absorbing a lot of the load, I should say. So the way fuel sources and loads are distributed are basically a function of the utility mix, some cultivator preferences, could be a construction timeline issue, like needing to get into cogen because of a hookup may take a while. So there's a varying degree of fuel sources and load distribution. Go ahead. This next slide, this should say in the East. This is data from Massachusetts. I apologize. Just a little bit of a different spin on what you saw before, but same basic message. I would recommend strategically you interact with the audience based on your energy goals, and there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. Go ahead. So now getting into actual, like, how much energy is being used, you can see there's a distribution of between 2 million kilowatt hours a year to 6+ million kilowatt hours a year, depending on the size of the operation. And even within sizes, there can be quite a bit of a range, if it is an efficient facility or not. Efficiency can mean a 40 to 50% reduction in overall energy usage from a standard, inefficient baseline. One specific anecdote there in Nevada, down below, roughly 2 million kilowatt hours a year for 4,200 square feet. So you can start of flowering canopy. So you can start to do the math based on what Molly was talking about as it relates to number of licenses and license size, etc. And then I'm going to get into a few recommendations here. So just to put you in the mind of a cultivator, why are they using all this energy? Why are they doing agriculture inside buildings? There's a lot of different reasons, but basically some of it is a function of this being an illegal market for some time, and just the mentality of hiding has resulted in working indoors and finding comfort there and finding value there. In some jurisdictions, it's required that facilities cultivate indoors because there's a jurisdictional concern about smell or visibility or safety or something to that effect. Indoor also can truly impact quality and can improve the reliability of the crop to survive because of all the weather variations that we're dealing with nowadays. So we can go into more detail on any of that, but that's just to give you some background and again, put you a little bit in the mind of the cultivator. So on the next slide, you know, final recommendations here. You should really know that this is a sector of the economy that thinks they're doing good things. They think they're promoting public health. They think that they're pushing social equity because, you know, historically cannabis has been used to subjugate Black and brown people. And, you know, the more as these markets become legal and business opportunities are available, you know, it can be used as a really effective tool to right the wrongs of the war on drugs. So a consideration there. Just don't treat them like criminals. Treat them like an important economic sector, which they are. You know, tax revenues are above $1 billion in multiple states now. Oregon just hit that mark. Washington and Colorado have hit that mark a while back. So be a business partner, understand where they're coming from, understand what their objectives are, and make that connection between governments and utilities and really help them succeed. I really want you all to think about the market of today as being different than the market, say, 2 or 4 years from now, when there will be federal legalization. I think it's pretty clear. Everybody feels like that is around the corner, whatever your definition of that may be. And so right now you're going to have a captured market. You're going to have the ability to build infrastructure and collect a lot of tax revenues. But in 2 years, if you've set up infrastructure and a whole cultivation market that is inefficient or is lacking in quality, you know, you're going to lose them. You're going to have mothballed facilities, and you know, your dispensaries will be filled with Oregon weed. But in the meantime, you have the opportunity to create an efficient, quality cultivation community that is producing long-term tax revenues only if they are going to be efficient. So think about that. Don't just sit idly by and wait for them to ask you about efficiency. Be engaged, and for your own good, for your own tax revenue long-term. And just as you do that, recognize that efficiency may not be their highest priority right out of the gate. They're focused on market share, you know, getting investor returns. And so you really need to time your conversation about conservation and hookup effectively, and just, you know, get these folks wired to be long-term partners to the state. I think that is the bulk of what I was going to talk about. Yeah. So we're happy to help. It's literally why we exist. Please give us a call. We're thrilled to serve. Take care.
Thank you so much, Derek. Next up, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks, Derek and Molly, for the good introduction there. Again, my name is Lauren Gaikowski. I'm an energy advisor with Franklin Energy. I work specifically on ComEd's agricultural energy efficiency program, and I help develop our Cannabis Express program, if you will, that's specific to our recreational and medical cultivators in the state. So today we'll just go over some different energy efficiency opportunities in the indoor agriculture sector, specific to cannabis. Give you some case studies that we've seen across the Midwest, and wrap it up from there. So next slide, please. So obvious opportunity that we see most people going after is LED grow lights. You know, typical energy savings that we can see is about a 30 to 40% reduction in energy usage compared to traditional legacy lighting. Like Molly said, most folks in the flowering stage are going to use 1,000-watt HPS fixtures in a more traditional setting, less efficient, if you will. So, you know, significant energy savings that you can see there. And not only that, but it's you know, the interactive savings that you can get on the cooling side is pretty significant as well. Like Molly and Derek both said, you know, these facilities have really high sensible and latent loads. The sensible is, you know, honestly, it's driven specifically because of the lighting that we have to have in order to mimic a natural environment, and then transpiration from the plants. So, you know, almost all of the water that you give a plant is going to be evaporated into the air, and that needs to be removed in order to prevent mold and mildew. So you can imagine, you know, the energy loads on these facilities are just incredible. But back to LED grow lights. You know, lifespans on fixtures are roughly around 50,000 hours. which is drastically higher than what we see with traditional HID fixtures. Most cultivators, after each harvest, they're going to switch out the the HID bulbs in their 1,000-watt HPS fixtures. So, 3 to 4 harvests a year, that's a lot of maintenance time that has now been avoided. One thing that I like to recommend to folks is look for fixtures that have a high PPE value. PPE, this stands for photosynthetic photon efficacy. It's essentially a measurement of how efficiently the fixture is converting watt energy into PAR radiation. There's a lot of acronyms with horticultural lighting. So, like Derek was saying, be a partner to these cultivators. Also understand the different metrics and the different scientific lingo that goes with these facilities. Watts, foot candles, illumination. Throw all of that out the window. You have to get on board with PAR, with photons, things of that nature. So back to PPE, the DLC actually does have a horticultural QPL. They're increasing their baseline PPE requirement for next year, and it's going to be 2.2 micromoles per joule. And that's also a requirement for a lot of states that are putting in energy efficiency regulations. Illinois, for example, has either a 36 watts per square foot requirement, or fixtures have to be DLC listed and have a PPE greater than 2.2 micromoles per joule. So something to definitely be aware of. Next slide there, Josh. So I wanted to give just a quick overview of what some potential incentives and actual kWh savings are going to look like for LED grow lighting. This example is actually coming to us from a cultivator in Michigan in the consumer's energy territory. The reason for this is just because in Illinois, with the energy efficiency code requirements, it was not going to be a true apples to apples comparison. So this is comparing 1,000 watt and 600 watt HID lighting in the baseline scenario. This is a new construction project. You can see in the flowering room, this customer installed 336 630 watt LED grow lights, just over 100 fixtures in the vegetative room. Just so everyone knows, vegetative stage, this is kind of where you're growing the plant taller and bushier so that it can support the weight of the buds. And then seedling rooms, this is where you're taking cutlings from a mother plant and starting a brand new plant. In this scenario, we assume 12-hour photo periods in the flowering stages and then 18-hour photo periods in the vegetative and seedling rooms. And the numbers speak for themselves, right? I mean, 1.7 million kWh saved, almost $200,000 savings a year. Incentive for this customer was $279,000 with a payback of just over a year. So pretty great opportunity for this customer. Incentives in ComEd territory are really great for LED grow lighting. So, I guess take examples of what other utilities have done and run with it in Missouri. Next slide there. So HVAC and dehumidification equipment. This is kind of, it's hard to give a quick 5-minute presentation on HVAC equipment just because there are so many different ways that you can set up your HVAC equipment for these facilities. But one thing that we've kind of seen in the Illinois market, at least, is this push towards a more industry-specific HVAC and dehumidification equipment. And what I mean by that is traditionally what we see is we've got separate equipment that will handle the sensible load, separate equipment that will handle the dehumidification load, and then maybe some sort of reheat system thrown in there. I know a couple of customers that I work with, they've just got freehanding electric heaters throughout their grow space. And, all of those systems just fight each other constantly. So we've seen a lot of folks deciding to move towards these all-in-one systems where they can cool, dehumidify, do any sort of necessary reheat with one piece of equipment. And there's significant energy savings to be had there. Another thing that we've seen is folks moving towards a more specialized dehumidification system. Again, this is dehumidifiers that are tailored specifically to cultivation spaces, rather than just relying on your cooling system to remove a certain percentage of latent heat and then having portable dehumidifiers that you purchase from Home Depot scattered throughout the grow space. And then this last one is more of a operational saving. Traditionally, we see cultivators grow at really low temperatures and relative humidity. I'm thinking like 65 degrees Fahrenheit and then 50% RH, which is really hard on the HVAC and dehumidification system. So if we can have cultivators, grow at a range of 75 to 80 degrees and then potentially 60 to 65% RH, that's fantastic operational savings with no CapEx expense. So next slide. So this is a hypothetical energy savings example. Illinois has not issued any craft grow licenses yet, so I can't give you an actual case study. But this is a calculation that we've done for a couple different growers. So let's say we've got a craft grower that's got 35,000 or 3,500 square feet of cultivation space in the flowering stage. And we actually compared for energy savings calculations this proposed all-in-one HVAC piece of equipment to a ductless mini split with standalone dehumidification. And this is actually, well, Molly talked about it before, but because of the Illinois code legislation. So what we did is we modeled the base case with the ductless mini split and the standalone to the proposed and calculated energy savings. And you can see here just about 265,000 kWh saved a year. For our ComEd program, we pay out incentives for custom projects, which is this one is, at 12 cents per kilowatt hour saved. So you can see they're getting just under $32,000 back as a utility incentive. Next slide. So just to wrap it up, some other opportunities that we've seen customers looking at in the past and have suggested to folks, lighting controls. So this is kind of a newer opportunity that we've seen folks, and I know the DLC is potentially looking at this as a separate piece of their horticultural QPL, but if we can have cultivators kind of mimic a natural sunrise and sunset versus this, just all of the flower rooms turn on, go to 100% of output, and then immediately turn off after 12 hours. Not only is this going to help in energy savings on the lighting side, but it can also, if we can ease the HVAC system into that sensible load, that's that's less work on the HVAC system. Another opportunity, and I know RII is looking at putting out a best practices guide for controls next year, but looking at sophisticated HVAC controls, the systems where we're going to have really tight environmental controls, and then you can tie that to your HVAC system. So there's not a whole lot of fluctuation between temperature and relative humidity. These plants, when you put them indoors, are really, really finicky, and they need, just a couple of degrees temperature ranges. So making sure that stays relatively homogeneous. One thing about controls is just making sure that you place the sensors within the plant canopy and they're not spaced, off on the walls where, temperature and relative humidity is not exact as it would be within the plant canopy. Jumping back to LED grow lighting, there are two new kind of market sectors that are emerging within this space, and that is externally driven and actively cooled LEDs. So externally driven, as the name implies, this is an LED fixture where there's no driver and there's a centralized power supply. These fixtures are not listed on the DLC's website as of yet. That's going to be a subcategory starting in 2021. And then actively cooled LEDs, this is where you have a refrigeration system that pulls all of the sensible load off of the fixtures and then expels that to an exhaust system, or potentially uses it for some sort of process. So, you not only get the added benefit of having a reduced wattage LED, you're also not rejecting that heat into your cultivation space. And now you're potentially using it for some sort of, reheat process or domestic hot water, wherever you need that heat for. So kind of a triple whammy there. And then last but not least, I wanted to give a quick example of a demand side management opportunity, and that is what we call flower room shifting. So rather than have all of the flower rooms turn on from, let's say 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and have this really high peak load turn on, potentially shifting those flower rooms. So, maybe staggering them. One room turns on every 4 hours, or doing kind of a split system where, flower rooms A through F are on from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and then flower rooms G through L are on in that off period. So you can really cut your demand almost in half by doing that. Next slide. So that's it for me. If anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, my contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk about energy efficiency in these spaces with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, very much. Definitely a lot of new stuff we have to think about here in Missouri. I know I've had conversations with our utilities about the additional load, and for a state that doesn't see a lot of load growth, it'll make a difference, but making sure we do it in a smart way, I think is really important, which you all pointed out. There is a question up right now from Donna Clark, and that is efficient light spectrum diodes. Example, purple or red diodes, question mark. I think that could be for anyone. Anyone understand that question?
Lauren, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I sure can. So efficient spectrum, I guess the best way to, well, we're going to get technical, folks. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
But how we measure light output in horticultural lighting is we look at it from the PAR spectrum, which is the electromagnetic spectrum, and that's the visible light that we can see. It's 400 to 700 nanometers. Traditional lighting, 1000-watt HPS fixtures, they'll have a really high output in the far red to red output, with little in the blues to greens and everything in between. LEDs these days are really balanced output and really mimic the, or try to at least mimic the light output that you would see from the sun. So you get a really balanced photosynthetic output from those fixtures. So it's not necessarily just doing, blues and purples or purple LED, right? We see a lot of folks doing these more white light spectra, but there's still the full PAR range in that fixture. Does that make sense? Derek, Molly, do you have anything to add?
Well, just spectra is a, that's a cultivator consideration, and there's different quality attributes that they may be seeking. It's not a simple answer. Look at fixture efficacy and understand your cultivator and what they're trying to get, what their objectives are, and there will be an answer somewhere in there.
Part of energy efficiency is also financing. Derek, you had mentioned to make sure that you get to the client at the right time. I was talking to a colleague the other day, and they made a comment of a widget maker doesn't get into making widgets and thinking about energy, right? They're thinking about selling their widgets, and energy is a second or third thing. So have to understand that and respect that part. But I do understand, am I right to suggest that financing the development of these structures and the programs is not an easy task, and is an issue that some of these companies are looking for financing when they are trying to just build their grow house?
Yeah, there's no federal backstop, so lenders are, not willing to lend, and a lot of times in the the build of the capital stack, they're not, the executives or the cultivators are not thinking about efficiency. They're just thinking about what they did in the illicit market, and so they get the capex sideways in terms of being aligned with efficiency. So there's sort of part of it is like teaching the efficiency value, and then there's finding financing sources that could help them address the capex. Could be PACE, could be all kinds of other state level full faith and credit type of enhancements that y'all could throw in the mix. I don't know what your tools look like in that regard, but ideally you've got some tool that could apply, that you could help invest in this sector and invest in its efficiency, so that again, long-term tax revenue are going to be much more likely if you've got a producer class that knows how to compete once the state walls come down.
Right. Well, I found out last week that the first, there was a first, and that was a cannabis project funded by PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy. It was the first one in the country. I know that MEI operates the Show Me PACE Clean Energy District and have been in conversations with a variety of different developers on this particular topic and hope to support that as well as we go forward. But it seems as if it's done first elsewhere. I haven't found that they were been a little coy about the location exactly, but it really comes down to one or two places. It's either Ohio or Michigan, I think, but maybe I'm wrong.
We'll
As
do
far
some
as PACE
research.
goes. Yeah. So I mean, that's an option for folks that are in this industry is if you're looking for alternative financing to go to those more expensive, but as Lauren pointed out, more effective units and save that energy with the upfront investment. Possibly PACE is a way to address that. Molly and Lauren, do you see, you have PACE in the Chicago area and the surrounding. Do you think that it will be utilized there in Illinois?
It's hard to say just because we only have 20 operational cultivation facilities in the state of Illinois right now. There have been some issues with the next wave of licenses due to the pandemic. There was an executive order issued to delay the further issuance of more licenses. So it's hard to say. I don't think there's been much of a connection made to applicants who are seeking a cultivation license and potential financing mechanisms. I will also mention, Derek kind of touched on this, that this market is highly, highly competitive. And in a place like Illinois, where there's limited licenses being released in stages, there's really going to be a rush to kind of be the first on the market and get your product out there. And cannabis kind of takes a little while once you get your license approved to have your crops ready for harvest and then start actually selling products in stores. So that there's really going to be a rush to fill these facilities with equipment, likely not the most energy efficient option, just in order to get plants in the building and start making sales, because that timeline between license approval and actually making a profit is kind of a longer window. So I don't foresee energy efficiency being a huge consideration at the outset of these facility designs. I hope that it will be, and we've been trying to educate stakeholders that the time to engage these facilities is now, before they're built out, before plants are in the building. But it's a challenge with this market that's just incredibly competitive and has a lot on the line. Their crop is worth millions of dollars. There's a lot of investors that are pouring money into the Illinois market. So there's a lot going on.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. It's definitely new in Missouri. Hopefully we find some good leaders out there. I know there are several applicants wanted to, be zero carbon impact as far as their development. So it'll be really interesting to see how those facilities come about and how efficiency and solar plays into it. But I thank you all very much for participating and sharing this information with us. And I look forward to working with you all as this industry grows in Missouri.
Thank you, Josh. I'll just say that there's 2 cultivators that are opening in St. Louis that we're in touch with pretty regularly, and I'm happy to make connections as useful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Well, everyone, that concludes